New Alien movie. Gotta dive into this one.
Always up for a good scare, especially in space. Let's do it.
We're taking a deep dive into Alien Romulus today, checking out a video review by Fuera de Foco with Gabby Mesa. Think of this as your spoiler-free breakdown, what works, what doesn't, and seriously, should you even bother adding it to your watch list?
It's age-old question.
Right. And, with a franchise like Alien, the stakes are high GH. We've seen masterpieces. We've seen, let's just call them missteps.
You're being diplomatic.
Maybe. But what makes Romulus so interesting is that it sounds like they're really trying to recapture that magic of the early films, That gritty 80s sci-fi horror vibe that still gives me chills.
It's a tall order. Those first two films, they really set the standard for sci-fi horror. They tapped into something primal, right? The fear of the unknown, that vastness of space, and those incredible practical effects. Oof, so good. Even today, they hold up.
Absolutely. And it sounds like Gabby really appreciated how Romulus embraces that aesthetic. She even mentioned a specific shot in the film that looked like it could have been ripped straight from the original Alien set.
Now, that's clever filmmaking, playing on that nostalgia, but assuring you that this director, they get IT,
Exactly. Like, okay, we're in good hands here.
And speaking of understanding its roots, Gabby was a huge fan of the practical effects in this one, too. She calls out how Romulus keeps the CGI to a minimum. Everything feels grounded and real, just like those early films.
Smart move. Not just from a nostalgia standpoint, but there's a certain, tangibility to practical effects that CGI often just can't replicate.
It just feels more real,
Exactly.
More immediate, and it definitely amps up the horror.
Oh, absolutely. There's this, specific kind of dread that comes from seeing a creature brought to life with practical effects. You can sense the artistry, the ingenuity. It adds this whole other layer of unease to the experience.
100%. So we've got the atmosphere, the visuals.
Huh.
But what about the story itself? Gabby described a group of workers escaping a bad situation, ending up on this new planet, and you guessed it.
Trapped on a ship. Come on, it's a classic.
It is.
It's like Horror 101. But for a reason, right?
For sure.
You're immediately setting the stage for claustrophobia, limited resources, that inevitable breakdown of social order as the tension mounts.
And throw Xenomorph in the mix.
Oh, yeah. Things are going to get messy. Guaranteed. And it sounds like Romulus really leans into that classic alien tension. Gabby mentioned how much she appreciated that the film feels more connected to the first two films, like steering clear of those more, what do we call them?
Divisive.
Exactly. The ones that left some fans feeling a little cold,
It's a smart move, strategically speaking, by kind of positioning Romulus within that specific timeline. It gives the filmmakers a lot of creative freedom,
Right.
They can tap into those core elements that fans love without being bogged down by, the weight of this whole franchise's mythology.
It's like they're saying, okay, we're here for the suspense, the practical scares, that claustrophobic atmosphere, all the good stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It lets them play with those audience expectations, too.
Yeah.
We know these xenomorphs. We know the Traft group scenario. But within those familiar parameters, there's still room for surprises, right?
Oh, totally. Speaking of surprises, Gabby did mention one criticism that stuck with me. She felt like some of the characters felt kind of flat, especially compared to, iconic leads like Ripley. She even says the lead actress gives a great performance, but the character itself just didn't quite grab her.
It is a tough balance, though.
Yeah.
Crafting these nuanced, well-rounded characters in a genre that often prioritizes, the shocking kills, the intense scares.
I know, right? It's true, though. I think with Ripley, we got such a strong, capable female lead. It kind of set a high bar. Maybe Romulus relies a little too much on those familiar tropes,
I see what you mean.
The damsel in distress, the jock with a heart of gold stuff that can feel a bit tired now.
That's a valid point. Audiences have evolved, We want characters who subvert those tropes a little. Characters who surprise us with their depth, their complexity.
Right.
It sounds like that might be one area where Romulus doesn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah. And here's another thing Gabby called out. Predictability. She felt like some of the jump scares, even some of the plot points, were a bit too obvious.
That's interesting, though, because it kind of raises a question. How much does predictability actually detract from a horror film? Is it always about the unexpected? Or can a well-executed scare still be effective even if you kind of see it coming?
That's a really good question. Because sometimes it's not about the what, it's about the how, right? Someone's about to get snatched by the monster, but it's the way the director builds the tension. The way they use sound, visuals, It's all about how those moments land, even if you're expecting them.
Exactly. It's the craftsmanship. A skilled filmmaker can take a familiar trope, a predictable scare, and still make it effective through sheer execution.
It's like a roller coaster, right? You know there are going to be drops and twists and turns, but it's the anticipation, the buildup, the overall experience that makes it thrilling.
100%. And speaking of execution, Gabby did mention one scene in particular where she felt like the tension just fizzled out.
Oh, yeah, what was that about?
So she described this scene, right, where the alien is right there, lurking in the shadows, about to strike. But then instead of going for the scare, the director just lingers on the shot, like for too long.
Ugh, I hate when that happens. It's like they give you too much time to think about it, and the fear turns into, okay, is something gonna happen? Or
Exactly. Classic example of pacing and editing working against the intended effect.
Right.
Sometimes less is more. A fleeting glimpse, a well-placed sound cue,
Yeah.
those can be way more terrifying than some long, lingering shot that gives you time to disengage.
For sure. So while Romulus has its flaws, Gabby clearly found things to appreciate. In fact, she gave it a very respectable 3.5 out of 5 stars. Not bad at all, especially for a franchise that's had its fair share of ups and downs, you know?
That's the truth.
But it sounds like Romulus at least manages to capture some of that spirit of the originals, even if it doesn't quite reach those same heights.
I think that's a good reminder that these franchises, they evolve, you know? New directors, new ideas, new technology, audience expectations change. It's almost impossible to recreate that exact magic of those early films. But it sounds like Romulus finds its own footing, you know, within that universe.
And sometimes that's all you can ask for. Something familiar, but fresh. It honors the legacy, but still forges its own path.
Exactly. And let's not forget, Gabby did mention one big surprise in store for fans. She wouldn't spoil it, but she hinted that it honors the original, but throws in something completely unexpected at the same time.
Ooh, now that is intriguing. You know I love a good twist, especially when it comes to these big franchises, but
It's the delicate balance.
it is. You want to surprise the audience, but you don't want to betray those core elements that make the franchise what it is, you know?
It's a total high-wire act. But when it's done well, man, a well-placed surprise can, like, re-energize a whole franchise, get the fans debating, leave a real impact.
It's like that feeling you get when you think you know exactly what's going to happen, and then bam, rug pulled out from under you, makes you reevaluate the whole thing.
The best. Okay, so we've unpacked it all. We've looked at the good, the bad, the slimy.
Well,
What's the final verdict? Should our listeners add Alien Romulus to their watch lists?
well, I think if you're a diehard fan of the franchise, especially those early films, it sounds like a must-see.
Definitely. It embraces those classic elements, the practical effects, the suspense.
Yeah.
Even throws in a surprise or two, like we said, if you're on the fence. Maybe a casual fan. I'd say it's still worth checking out, especially if you're looking for a solid sci-fi horror flick, you know, one with that old school vibe. Just maybe go in with the understanding that it might not reinvent the wheel.
It's true. But hey, sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes a fun, thrilling ride is enough. Right?
100%. And I think it's easy to get caught up in the whole debate of, does it live up to the legacy, especially with a franchise as beloved as Alien? But
Right.
sometimes it's good to just sit back, enjoy the experience, and appreciate a film for what it is there.
Couldn't agree more. All right, deep divers, that's our spoiler-free deep dive on Alien Romulus with a little help from Gabby Mesa. We've unpacked the good, the bad, and everything in between, and hopefully left you wanting more. Until next time, keep exploring those shadowy corridors, and may your popcorn stay safely in your lap.